Good afternoon, my name is Kelly. I work as a solutions engineer at our studio. And solutions engineers at our studio do a number of things within the company. One of the things that I'm responsible for doing is working with our customers to help them integrate our professional server products into their own environments. And then I take what they give us as feedback about their experience and help improve our products going forward. So that's one of my favorite things to do. But I also like tinkering with our server products and exploring the space and thinking about how especially we can work towards incorporating more software engineering practices and learnings from DevOps into the deployment and management of the pieces of content that we create and share as data scientists. So I helped create the Shiny in Production workshop at our studio conference in 2019, back in January. We have this book down called A Supplement to Shiny in Production, available on GitHub. And today I want to talk about some extensions to Chapter 12, DevOps Philosophy and Tooling. And specifically, I want to talk about how production means many things to many people, especially with Shiny apps and our Markdown and things we put into various environments which we call production. And I want to talk about some lessons that we can incorporate from DevOps. So the problem I wanted to think about and experiment with is how to introduce new features to Shiny applications in production over time. My experience learning Shiny was, in grad school, where I was just building these one-off applications, very personal. I would share them eventually with people, but if I needed to change them or make some kind of change, that was no problem. I just update the application. So here's kind of the problem statement here I'm thinking about. I have this old faithful Geyser Data app, and I want to sort of change it, make it into version 2. So this is what I would typically do. Standard, I would just push a new version of that application. But we're finding that people really want to embrace more of a software engineering workflow into keeping these applications in production. So great practices here involve Git, GitHub, maybe doing some CI/CD, Jenkins, Travis, programmatic deployment to your production server, or building out some sort of pipeline that will help you do that plus testing and whatever else you want to do. But even then, software engineers still feel like sometimes, especially when you have an application in production that you're really counting on to be there all the time, pushing a code change can still, even with all of those tools, feel risky. So from DevOps, there are a couple different concepts that help you think about patterns for creating solutions around this problem specifically. And one of those patterns is the idea that you'd want to decouple deployment from release. And before I started learning about DevOps, I thought about deployment, application deployment, as the same thing as a release. But you can actually separate those two concepts. If you think about deployment as a push of code to an environment and a release as a separate thing, which is when that code or feature is made available to users or your customers or whomever. So there are two different types of patterns that this book, DevOps Handbook, covers. And I'm sure there are more. There's experimental things and things that as the study and the philosophy evolves over the next several years, we'll try out and discover. But these are the two big ones that this book covers. And one that I'm going to talk about today is application-based release patterns, so using feature toggles. But I actually got 2 talks accepted to this conference, so tomorrow I'm going to be talking about environment-based release patterns. So the feature toggle is essentially a mechanism to selectively enable and disable features and then control which of those features are visible to your specific user segments. So this enables you to do something that they call a dark launch. So take a set of features that you're new, your development features, and just make them available to a beta testing group, but have them in that same production app, and over time, release that new feature set to a bigger and bigger set of users. And we actually have an app in the Shiny gallery that Jeff Allen, one of my colleagues at our studio, built many years ago, which is called the Personal UI application. And this application gives you, exposes a user login pane. And based on which user you are, so if you're a manager user or a salesperson user, you sign into the app using your credentials, and then it exposes a different set of data and gives you a slightly different UI based on who you are. So that kind of smelled like feature toggles to me. And I opened that app, pulled down the code, and started tweaking it to explore whether I could use that pattern in the same sort of way. So there's this article called Personalized Data Access that's also available on the Shiny Dev Center website. And what it does essentially is lets you exploit this session user object. And so here are the two views. On the left, you have the manager view. So if you're a manager and you sign into this application, you can see that your whole sales group, all the data. But if you're a salesperson and you sign in, you can only see your data. And so you have basically these three elements in the application. You have this title, which is the same across, but you have a subtitle, you have the graph, and then you have the data below it. So digging in further, I learned that you can use this session user object, you can assign it to a reactive, and then use that to expose different outputs that will then either show or hide different portions of the UI. So you can do that for session user, but you can also do it for session groups, which is really relevant to me because I work a lot with the RStudio Konnekt server product and that engineering team. And with Konnekt, if you're unaware, you can very easily through the UI manage your own groups of users. So that was a cool feature for me. But either one are very interesting, and I explored both. I'll show you in some examples. But this is how Jeff Allen's app actually gets implemented. You go in and you say, okay, I want this output subtitle, and it's going to render some text. If is null user, then it's going to say, hey, you need to log in to see this application. If your user is a manager, it returns this monthly manager subtitle. And if you are a salesperson user, it returns hey, you're a monthly sales report for, and then it gives a username. So it goes through and sort of programmatically, based on these conditional tests, either returns nothing for that space in the app, or it returns the data or the sales plot. So these three items either will return something or they'll return nothing based on who that session user is. So that was really cool, but I wanted to extend it a little bit further. That wasn't quite everything that I wanted to do with an application because you can either take, so what Jeff had done was say, I want to output something or nothing. But there are things in Shiny applications that don't really get handled that elegantly with this method. For instance, if you wanted to either show a button or not, or an input selector or not. So for those things, I took a different approach and started looking into dynamic UI. And if you search Shiny Dynamic UI, you'll find an article on the Shiny Dev Center that'll take you through 4 basic methods for generating a UI dynamically. And the easiest one, the one that I picked to start, was the Conditional Panel function. So the Conditional Panel function kind of works one of 2 ways. You can have it dynamically generate another piece of the UI based on something that's inputted from the user. But a less common pattern is to dynamically generate based on an output. So an output object is your session user, your session group. So I found this output condition example from Di Natale that I found was really simple and really easy to follow. So use that pattern to build some conditional panels based on session user and session groups. And essentially, what the conditional panel function does is you use it inside your UI to wrap a set of UI elements, and then they're dynamically shown or hidden based on that reactive output variable. So the pattern would be, you have this is beta output reactive, and within it you want to test for user or group membership. And based on that, if it is false, you show one version of the application, and if it's true, you show another version. And what I would do using feature toggles is use those conditional panels to build out those beta tested features. Now, after a couple weeks of experimenting with this, I came to the conclusion that feature toggles might be useful in this case, but I don't think that I would personally use them for deployment and release as a pattern, because your code turns into something that is not super easy to manage or automate or test or ultimately toggle back and forth. So as an alternative, I found that environment-based release patterns were a lot easier to use in that respect. So if you don't come to the talk tomorrow, know that that's the TLDR there. But I still think that feature toggles are a really cool concept, and they are useful for solving other types of problems that I've experienced using our server products. So the rest of this talk kind of goes over some really basic hacks that you can use to extend some of their server feature products and mix some of the access controls that are built into those products along with feature toggles to get new solutions. So here's a rundown of what you see on RStudio Connekt when you go and you publish an application and you get control over who will see that application running on your server. So you have 4 basic access control settings to pick from. You can go anyone, no login required, all users, just specific users and groups, or just you. And this kind of shows people and group management. I'll skip that though. But the problem that I wanted to solve, and this is one that I commonly have when working on our internal Konnekt servers at our studios, we have all of these servers, and they're really fun to use, and we have different groups of people within our studio publishing application content to them and demoing it for different groups of people, taking it to conferences, using it for workshops. And there's situations where you'll find a piece of content that looks really interesting, and you won't know who built it, or where it came from, or what it was used for, or how to get access to the code behind it, because you just won't have been given access. Even though at our studio we are very open and we like to share things with each other, sometimes somebody will forget or not put you on as a collaborator. So if you ever get in a situation where you want collaborator access, there isn't a way to request that specifically. So I came up with two general solutions. And the first one is really easy. You can just give people access to the code. If you're using Git, my colleague Cole Arndt, who also works on the solutions engineering team, wrote this package called Git Link, which will add a little Work Me on GitHub banner to your Shiny app, which is really cute. So you can always throw that on an app. You don't need a feature toggle for that. But an alternative is that you could use a feature toggle to just expose a button, an action button, to people who aren't listed as collaborators. So if you come to my application and you are part of my collaborator group, you won't see this button. But if you aren't a collaborator, then you will see a button, and that button I want to send me a Slack message. So that was the project that I decided to tackle. And I did that by using one of these conditional panels. And my condition is the output test for is Collaborator. So if you are not a collaborator, I want to show this action button. And I want that action button to send me a Slack message that says, hey, this user has requested collaborator access on this specific application. So I use the basic action button command pattern that you can find on the Shiny server website, and wanted to build a Slack solution for that. And there are a bunch of different R packages that you can use to build out Slack apps like this, but I tried a bunch of them, and frankly, I just recommend going to Slack and building a Slack application from scratch. It was really super easy. All you have to do is, sign up to create a Slack app, say I want it to be an incoming webhook, and then you have to structure a JSON payload to send that message over through your Slack application. So it's literally just these 3-4 steps. And then the only tricky part is that you have to find your Slack member ID in order to get the Slack message to say, hey, notify Kelly. So that's how you find your member ID. You structure your JSON payload, put together your action button command pattern, which I've shown here, and then structure your UI. So this is all of the application together. Here you can see the request collaborator access button. And I have a couple of these examples that I've put up on GitHub along with little YouTube demo videos. You can find all of the code there on GitHub and my slides at this bit.ly link. So thank you.